So how does Virtual VITA work? Which is the next slide. You need two sites, and there's information on the IRS in their Form 1084 that provides this as well. But you have a preparation site where you've got a VITA preparer. They're IRS trained, they've been through the training, they're able to do a person's taxes and are certified by the IRS to do that. They have some kind of software. TaxWise software is what the IRS partners with. It is no cost if you are a VITA site to use it, but you could use other software as well. Some sort of technology. It could be high-speed internet, which is the one I'm talking about with the video conferencing. We need some sort of high-speed internet connection for that, or fax machine would work in there well. And then dual-screen monitors. And then the IRS also requires at least another person to be able to review the taxes before they're sent back. On the intake site, this is where it becomes a little easier for a rural location. Thinking back to the maps I showed you up there, all you need is a volunteer. I think it's important that they're trained to be able to handle an IRS form 1361-4, which is the intake form. It helps if they've prepared taxes before, but that's not required, particularly if you're doing video conferencing, because the questions can be asked right over the screen there. But you need a volunteer to be able to kind of help manage the basic technologies, setting the computer up and getting the person in there, and then it's done. The person could be up in a remote area, and then 300 miles away you've got a tax preparer sitting at a computer talking to them on a video conferencing system. The next, the bottom two.
Ross,
yeah.
Can I ask you something? The
Yeah.
intake volunteer, can you go back to the other slide? The intake volunteer at the local site, right?
Mm-hmm.
So at the rural site, isn't helping the person coming in to get the family coming in to get their taxes done. They're not actually helping the family do the taxes. It's the preparer at the preparation site that's doing it.
Correct, and that's actually the next slide.
Okay.
Yeah, this is IRS requirements. No returns can be prepared at the intake site, and only volunteers who are certified can do the taxes. In fact, the volunteer, unless they're certified at the intake site, can't even provide a tax advice to the taxpayer. So it's helpful to have somebody who's a certified volunteer preparer is if you don't have access to a video conference, and let's say you have a drop-off site, or the intake site is where the taxpayer comes, leaves their information, everything they need to have their taxes done, the ID is checked at the intake site, the form is filled out, it's called the intake form, is filled out, and then it's faxed or scanned and emailed to another location where the taxes are actually prepared. That's where that's where I would encourage you to have somebody who's been through the training or knows what questions to ask, because there's not going to be that real-time virtual face-to-face that you get through a video conferencing. But if you're using a video conferencing, absolutely, the person does not need to be trained beyond just being able to get a person in front of a computer. Couple other things. As I mentioned, kind of the intake site may fax, email, mail copies of the taxpayer's documents necessary for preparation, but to put it simple, you can just have your intake site with a volunteer, whatever technology you're using, who's able to collect the information and then get it to the actual physical brick-and-mortar VITA site that could be in an urban center that may have a plethora of volunteers or have a larger access to a volunteer base than the rural center. The next slide talks a little bit about what they did in Michigan. They used something called Movi desktop video conferencing. This is a fairly expensive piece of software that was purchased by the Van Buren Intermediate School District. Any member in Michigan is able to use that thanks largely to the Van Buren Intermediate School District. The bonus of Movi is it's similar to actually what GoToMeeting is if you've got a face-to-face option on it, is it's a secure, encrypted video conferencing, whereas Skype or GChat, those are not. Last I heard, the IRS, you can use Skype, you can use that, but again, you would need to check with your spec person or your local IRS representatives there. But what they used in Michigan was the dual screen monitor, actually a laptop and then another monitor desk. So that way the person with the video camera could look at the person whose taxes they're doing and then have up on the other screen their actual software where they're completing the taxes. And then at the intake site you also had dual screens so that the person was able to look at who was doing their taxes and also see the information as it was entered. What was tested in this pilot, and it was a very limited pilot, but was using mobile hotspots. Broadband connectivity is an issue in rural communities, and now you've got the mobile hotspots and use that. The quality was not as good, but it did work. Next slide. Things that you will want to consider for, or next for Virtual VITA is in the upcoming year where the local group here in Lansing, Michigan, where I'm located, the Asset Independence Coalition, is going to be looking at doing the Virtual VITA out of Lansing, which is a city center with some of the rural counties outside of the Lansing area. Their tax prep site is actually going to be at Olivet College, which is south of Lansing by about 30 miles. So their actual tax preparers will be college students who are at a university not even in the Lansing area, where the intake site will be in Eaton County. The last slide is really kind of some things to consider. I think this is great. I'm glad the IRS is moving towards this. The questions I would consider if I were interested in this is, can taxpayers' needs be matched with volunteer resources? And making that connection. If you're in a state where you've got a city and you're doing rural work, several hundred miles away, how do you tap into that? Some of these things have been mentioned before. IRS has a site, the National Community Tax Credit Coalition, the last webinar had their email on it, and I think we can give that again. Is there suitable access to basic technological requirements? That's if you're going to do the video conferencing, do you have access to the laptops, the dual screen? Do you have access to volunteers who can handle that technology if there's a hiccup or something on the back end? And lastly, kind of building off my last point, are intake sites accessible to clients and appropriate and able to have a trained volunteer in the intake process? That's particularly important if you're not going to do a face-to-face video, because anybody who has done this, preparers, really, will have follow-up questions during the tax preparation process. So, if they don't have all the information, it slows down the process, and then the clients become frustrated, and what was initially going to be a very easy, drop your paperwork off, pick up your taxes 2 days later, becomes a longer 2 or 3 week process. So you need to, when you're looking at it, building a Virtual VITA, really figure out how you want to do that and what's best for your community that meets your needs as an organization as well as your clients' needs. You need any more information, you can go to the last slide. There's a couple other states that have done some of this. Florida, there's a link to that there on their book, Will Virtual VITA Work for You? Colorado is doing the drop-off. If you see page 37 of Form 1084, my name's right there. You can email me. Tom Richardson is the one who's really been innovative in doing this in Michigan. And he's also able to be contacted at the Van Buren Intermediate School District.